Listen up, this is true, and tormented me for years. Settle in. So it all started when my father, and I moved into a house. It was a 3-story house with 2 apartments on each floor. The house was over 100 years old, but well renovated, and right across the street was my new school. We were surrounded by a lovely park, all in all, an amazing place to grow up. I was 5, maybe 6 years old at the time. Back then, I noticed a lot of shadows in the corners of my eyes. This went on for 10 years without me realizing that it was, in fact, not a normal eye thing. When I was young, I was extremely afraid of the dark. And for some reason, I always thought Batman was going to stand there when I opened my eyes and kill me. Thinking back, Batman was a very tall black figure, which is going to be important later on. I've always been extremely sensitive to the energies around me and the paranormal. So my guess is that I already sensed his presence, but didn't know what it was yet. I was also dealing with depression and insomnia ever since I was very young due to bad family stuff. But that is also relevant. When I got older, about 12, my mental issues started to worsen drastically, and I started to cut myself and stuff like that. My insomnia was pretty bad, and after I finished high school at 15, my sleep cycle was messed up beyond repair. I was usually awake at night and slept during the day, or often not at all. I was constantly sleep deprived. Weird stuff started to happen. Objects would disappear and reappear after months. Stuff would randomly fall off shelves, harmless things like that. But I noticed it, and it was odd. I started hearing voices, yelling or whispering my name. It was the voices of my dad or brother most of the time, only to realize they weren't home or were asleep. It got worse pretty fast. It was a long time ago, and I can't remember the exact order of events, but there were multiple auditory phenomena. Gurgling, like someone was being choked to death, coming from the middle of our living room. Strange music awakening me at night, coming from the corner of my room, only to get quieter and quieter, and then disappear again. Knocking on the walls, always 3 times. Horrible demonic screeches, footsteps, mainly coming from the attic, which was right above our apartment. Sometimes it sounded like someone was throwing around whole closets up there, really loud rumbling in the middle of the night. By that time, I already knew my house was haunted, but I didn't know what it was yet. So, my neighbor and friend Natasha, who was my age, and we grew up together. She also had an older brother, Peter, who was my brother's age, and I started to investigate. We realized that she and her brother had been bothered by the entity before I had, and they had a guest room that was mainly where it stayed at first. Ever since I lived there, I could not enter the room because the presence was so overwhelmingly evil, almost like the air was crushing you. That same feeling I got after it started, and I had it 24/7 for about a year. That feeling as if someone is standing right behind you, holding a knife to your back, very, very uneasy. I'm sure some of you know the feeling, so I tried to communicate with it and gave it lots of attention, thinking it was a ghost, which was my biggest mistake. Things got a lot worse very quickly, and it had completely attached to me because I was the perfect victim and a buffet of negative emotions, which I later learned was their main energy source to make them stronger. One night, I looked at the shadow in the corner of my eyes and saw a black silhouette of a cat jump off my bed and disappear midair, or rather, evaporating like smoke. I jumped because I sensed someone standing behind me, and there it was in full form. It was what many people call shadow people, or the Hat Man. I'm sure there are other terms, but I later learned that these shadowy figures are demons, and they can appear in various forms, often with glowing eyes or a hat. Mine was blank, no face, no hands or feet, not even a real head, but it was about 2 meters tall and filled up the room with dark, smoky shadow. It stared into my soul with its non-existent eyes for a moment. I froze in shock, but as fast as it appeared before me, it disappeared again. After that, things got really bad because I started to really research and knew what I was dealing with. I got obsessed. I didn't sleep. I didn't eat. This was all I cared about. He started to play mind games after that point, which was probably the peak of his haunting. Due to my depression and suicidal tendencies, I welcomed darkness and wasn't scared of many things. After that night, I almost started to cry when the lights were out or only half on. He knew that and used it against me, shattering a light bulb in our apartment every 2 days or so. We were pretty poor, so we wouldn't always get a new one immediately, and since I was awake at night, I had to deal with it. He was active during the day too, but when the clock hit 2:04 a.m., it was the worst. That's when they are most active. One time, I walked into the kitchen, and before I could turn on the lights, I stepped on something weird. I turned on the lights to find the floor crawling with maggots. Every inch was covered in them. I was shocked, grossed out, and panicked. I tried to shovel them up and put them in the trash, basically crying through the whole thing. Somehow, they were light and flighty and disappeared into the walls after a few minutes. There weren't any cracks, which added to my confusion. One time, I talked to it all day, just speaking into the air, but I felt its presence and hoped it would let me sleep late at night. I remember saying something like, "I gave you attention all day now, and I would appreciate it if you let me sleep." The energy in the room suddenly got really aggressive, and I felt something choking me for a few minutes. That was the one and only physical attack I experienced. They generally don't want to physically harm us because it would be counterproductive. They will, however, do it if it helps their grand plan to break us. Basically, I was an exhausted wreck because I spent my nights literally fighting off a demon. I knew I needed help and registered on a paranormal forum. There was a guy who ended up helping me twice. He was magically talented and able to astral project and stuff like that. Back then, he strongly weakened the demon, and it actually stopped for a few years. Every now and then, little things would happen, but nothing that made me worry. He still followed me everywhere and had a strong negative impact on my emotions and overall well-being, so much that he drove me to try to commit suicide at the age of 16. There were other reasons that contributed to it, but I I strongly believe that he was to blame for the most part. This whole experience was extremely traumatizing, like living in a horror movie. Besides my friends who lived in the house, no one believed me. My dad didn't take me seriously, and my brother knew stuff was going on, but he was scared, so he decided to ignore it and leave me alone with it. There were so many more things that happened, but I can't possibly write them all down here. This post is already long enough. I saw some apparitions over the years or heard weird stuff, but overall, it left me alone. I'm not sure if he was waiting for the right time again or if he was too weak. After my suicide attempt, I went to a clinic and met my future best friend. We started to communicate with the demon via Ouija board, but there wasn't much useful stuff, he said. I learned that they just tell you what you want to hear, and that you can basically not believe a single word they say. I developed some kind of messed up mental connection with him. Well, about 2 years ago, he became active again. I went to bed at night, and my boyfriend was already lying there. I put out all the lights and closed my eyes. I opened them again and noticed there was light in the living room. As I looked, the light was turned off again. He waited until I looked. These light plays were what he used to do years ago too. And while this might seem harmless, I knew this was it. It's starting again. I was so scared that my body shook violently for hours, and my boyfriend had to comfort me. I contacted my friend who helped me years ago, and we spent a couple of months developing a plan to trap the demon in an object. My friend ended up going behind my back and doing something far more risky, but it worked, and the demon is gone for good. At least I think he is.